Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of week 2, where we are focusing on team empowerment. Today, we are specifically going to discuss the problem solving, or more accurately said, the team solutioning or facilitating a team member solutioning through advising and consulting, and the juxtaposition of those two things, and when it may be more appropriate to advise or consult, or to sequence them both together, and what type of empowerment impact that will have on your team, which then in turn impacts our performance as leaders and our ability to deliver on expectations. And we'll talk about this next week, how to exceed expectations. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So what's the motivation to do this? It's all about finding the best solutions to the challenges that you're facing, your team is facing. And the process of doing that is what helps, not only the process, but how you implement the process and how the experience of the process is perceived by others helps to build your leadership brand. So what should you and your team expect out of this? Again, we're always defaulting back to that motivations and accessibilities and how they help to facilitate behaviors and habits that are aligned to aspirations, targets, expectations, etc. You can expect to motivate your team members by demonstrating you want them to grow as a leader. And one particular solutioning method really helps to facilitate that. We'll get into that in a moment. It helps to make your team's leadership capability more accessible by supporting them in solving problems. So not only do you want to become better at leading people, there's going to be people on your team that are going to want to become better leaders as well. So how you approach this area of solutioning can help to facilitate that. So when do these things arrive? What's the prompts? The motivation, accessibility prompts for the desired behavior. That it could be in different scenarios, and we'll talk about that briefly. It usually, for this type of conversation, you may do it more in a one-on-one setting and in specific group settings. But it's all about, like, when somebody needs to decide something, how you're helping them to get to that decision, that right solution. So just taking a moment to think about this, like, ultimately at the end of the day, what is this? It's choosing the right method for helping your team or individuals on your team to find the right solutions to any given problem or opportunity. And these approaches can help to make solutioning easier in different ways with different pros and cons. And ultimately, through this process, the motivation that you're creating is building confidence. So when you look at habit building overall, when you're successful in one step, it drives your motivation to do the next step, which could be more difficult. So when we're helping team members to overcome obstacles through these two methods, we are doing that, and we are building that resilience. So what does it mean to advise? So this is when a team member shares a challenge or an opportunity with you, and you're telling them what you would do in this situation. And why is it good? It's good for empowering someone who normally creates solutions on their own, but is stuck. And a consulting approach has failed, and we'll talk about a consulting approach in a moment. It's challenging and beneficial because your experience can bias a solution. Sometimes your experience could be good. You can apply lessons learned, but also sometimes our experience doesn't mean that there's other applicable experience that is not part of your journey that could be applied that potentially gives a better solution. Or perhaps the experience actually creates a worse solution that the person may have gotten from someone else or derived themselves. And this one's pretty key, and this goes to micromanagement. So you can actually demotivate people if you're constantly telling everyone what the solution is, and even worse, telling them how it should be done and how every step of it should be done. You're essentially taking away people's control, their ability to commit, their freedom, their ability to be authentic and to bring their intrinsic motivation to the work that they're doing. It goes all back to this concept of increasing time quality, and the time quality coupled with time quantity is ultimately what delivers the productivity and performance. So becoming a micromanager in this area and always determining the solutions and how to implement the solutions can be extremely demotivating, especially for team members that are aspiring to be leaders themselves. Now, this method can be very beneficial in a crisis situation. So where there's a lot of stress, there's a time crunch, there's a difficult situation, perhaps publicly facing, and someone's got to make decisions quickly and to direct the team to get something done. And in an example like this could potentially be motivating for the team to see that there's someone in charge, in power, that's directing the team. This does not preclude you from soliciting solutions from your team members, but it's also in that type of situation, you would need to be very prescriptive in terms of the things that you're looking for and to facilitate immediate solutions in real time. And if you can't do that through your team members, again, making the decisions and advising and telling your team what they need to do. Also, that's a unique type of situation. That is a challenge that maybe you or the team need to solve quickly. And it's less of a challenge that an individual team member might be facing, and you're telling them what you would do in this situation. So there's a bit of a nuance there, but it's just really important to be mindful here, not to leverage advise all the time, because it could come off as being micromanagery, as well as you're not giving your team members the opportunity to build muscle in terms of developing their own solutions. And when we don't have that capability in our team, it's going to be a hindrance to you scaling, because it means you are doing more work across more people and you're not leveraging the mind share and the capabilities of the other members of your team. So let's talk about the other side of solutioning, and that is the consulting approach. So this is when a team member shares a challenge or an opportunity, and you ask questions that help them develop the solutions themselves. So for example, if somebody would come to me and say that on a particular client, they're having a challenge with them agreeing to a plan of a set of services that we think would be beneficial, I would ask a series of questions to help to understand, like, what is the true problem? What is the motivation for the client? Helping the person to first understand, like, do they have all the data that they need to provide a solution for a client or to influence the client in the right direction? So I would seek and ultimately get them to assess for themselves if they have that information. And then upon getting that additional information set, how they would think about applying the information to broaden the solution. So for example, maybe they didn't realize a perspective of the client, and I asked them, did you speak with all the stakeholders on the client side? You know what, I didn't speak to these two stakeholders, but if I did, they perhaps would have given this perspective. So what do you think happens when you incorporate that perspective in the potential solution or communicating solutions that you already have? How might you modify that? So I'm not telling them what the answer to that question is. I'm not telling them what I would do, but I'm helping them through and I'm getting them to solution. And over time, I might not be the one asking the questions. Once we go through maybe a few iterations of this, I would likely say, well, what are the things that you need to ask in order to help you understand what a better solution is? So getting them to actually think about the questions that they would need to ask to create a solution. So it goes from this state of advise what I would do in your situation. It moves to this state of like me doing consulting and discovering and coaching them to get to the solution. And then it finally moves to a stage of them doing their own self-consulting and me just making sure that they are asking the questions to help find the information and then slightly help them to develop that solution. So when is this preferred? It's preferred for most situations for some of the reasons that I explained before when talking about advising, and that's because it's really great for empowering team members and developing their independence and skills. So empowering, if I can come up, I can come up with solutions, that's motivating for me because I've been able to do it. And then when the next challenge comes my way and I know the right questions to ask or how to find the solutions, it further motivates me, it increases the probability I'm going to be successful. It also gives me more control of my own destiny. And we talked about that in the first week and how, as for us as leaders, that's empowering for us. And that's the independence piece, like independence, freedom, the ability to take more ownership of my destiny and establish more control, or realizing all the things I can control to help create the outcome or the solution that I'm seeking. However, it can be demotivating. So sometimes you can get to a point where a team member is just really exhausted or they've maybe tried and they haven't been able to get a solution. And you take them through this consulting process and they're just like, what would you do in this circumstance? That can be really frustrating because it can make team members feel like you're not listening to them and you're not understanding, you're not picking up on the cues. And depending on the power dynamic, they may not be very inclined to inform you. And that could also be a measure of the relationship that you have with your team members. So, which do we choose in a circumstance like that, or in other circumstances? My preference is generally a consult approach for most situations because of the reasons that I described from an empowerment point of view. Advising, this is what I would do in your circumstance. And then again, depending on things like the power dynamic, somebody might feel very inclined to do what you said to do because of something like that, and how that factors into their motivation and maybe not building resilience and making the next problem that comes along in terms of execution and solving it any easier. So on the accessibility side. And as I mentioned earlier, not being conscious of the situation can actually hurt. So if you're not realizing that you should advise and not consult because the person is exhausted, or you are advising you should be consulting, that can cause problems. So what's the best way to hedge against this? So it's much prevention is what's the expression? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. You can just ask, right? If it's the beginning of a conversation in a one-on-one and somebody's presenting you with a problem, I've done this before. I would say something like, I could let you know what I would do in your circumstance, but I can also help to coach you through it and help you to build your own solution, which is what you prefer. And the thing to be mindful here when you take this approach is if somebody always picks the advise approach, that is not a good sign, in my opinion. That means that there isn't as much of an opportunity to develop for that individual. And if they do constantly pick advice, you may want to ask them to let's try the consulting approach so we can, excuse me, help to build your resiliency here. All right, so what are the action items? Most of the action items in the program are about building these like little habits and or walking through these exercises of doing these things. So what you want to do is to go to the form right now and just briefly fill it out because it will mimic the exercise for you quickly. It takes a couple of minutes. So please go ahead and do that. And we will be back here the next day to talk about the next kind of empowerment, and I'll see you then.